This podcast is made possible by the Chicago Institute for Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy and is powered by Podcastle. All right, welcome to the Rational Harm Reduction Podcast. My name is Jack Slinsky. I am a peer recovery support specialist. Today, I am joined once again by my friend and mentor, the founder and director of the Chicago Institute for Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, Terry London. Terry, thanks so much for joining us. Terry has been practicing REBT for over 50 years and was trained by and worked directly with the creator of REBT, Dr. Albert Ellis. Terry has also written a number of books about REBT and continues to lead REBT groups and individual REBT sessions. So really, really grateful that Terry's here to help us today. We are also joined by our volunteer guest, Mel Byrnes. Mel is coming on today volunteering to have a discussion about mental health. And I just wanted to give a little content warning for anybody tuning in. We will be discussing, or at least mentioning quite a bit, domestic violence and sexual violence. So just a heads up for anybody who's tuning in, that's the content that we're going to be discussing today. And I also really wanted to thank Mel for trusting us and being vulnerable and helping to kind of fight against the stigma surrounding these types of issues and show folks that they're not alone going through these types of traumas. So once again, Mel, thank you so much for trusting us and coming on. I also just wanted to mention that this is not a professional therapy session. This is just a psychoeducational conversation that we're having with our guest today about how to move past some of these traumatic events. So we use a psychoeducational approach called REBE, Rational Emotive Behavior Education. And we're just offering some guidance, suggestions on things that could be potentially helpful. And the other point of the conversation is just, like I mentioned earlier, to help fight against the stigma surrounding these various traumas, to show people that they're not alone in facing these types of issues. So just wanted to make that statement. I also wanted to give a little bit of a background on the framework that we use here. We use the REBE approach, and that uses the ABC method. So the ABC method is kind of based on the theory that no event in the world directly makes you feel or behave in any type of way. It's more directly coming from your belief system. So what you're telling yourself. When we kind of go in and analyze the belief system, we're then able to dispute some of those irrational beliefs that usually or almost always lead to unhealthy negative emotions. REBT is the only form of therapy that really differentiates between unhealthy negative emotions and healthy negative emotions. So in terms of unhealthy negative emotions, we would be looking for things like depression, despair, rage, anxiety, shame, embarrassment. And in terms of healthy emotions, there's kind of always a healthy counterpart for each one of those that we would want to guide you towards. So we would guide you towards healthy concern or healthy frustration or grief, things like that, which are not unhealthy. They're not pleasant to feel, but they're actually healthy. They help us kind of process through these activating events. Some of these activating events that are not in our self-interest. So that's kind of a little bit of a background on how we approach different happenings in our life, different events that happen to us. So while we never want to invalidate the trauma or the traumatic events that happen to us, we want to analyze the beliefs behind them or what we're telling ourselves about those events. Without further ado, I would like to introduce my co-host, Terry London, and our volunteer guest, Mel Byrnes. You guys, thank you so much for joining me today. No, I know we talked a little bit online about some different things that you had been through. But really, the point of the podcast is just to, kind of destigmatize some mental health stuff and give you some guidance, maybe some tools that might be potentially helpful. And then, kind of share it and help other people realize that, they're not the only ones who go through this type of stuff. So, is there anything that's on your mind right now that you'd like to dive into?
Yeah, I guess I would like to know, how do you move past the trauma of when you've been in domestic violence and you've been perpetrated to sexual violence and forced addiction and had someone pretty much just remove your soul out of your body, and how do you let yourself recover from that and open up to other people and realize that not everyone's the same, but how to get out of your own head onto allowing yourself to move on from that person.
Well, first of all, if those are your personal experiences, I have great compassion and empathy because obviously you were perpetrated against and you were a victim of someone else's rotten behavior.
Mm.
And your question again would be is that, see if this makes sense to you. When I work with people, either with those kind of traumatic events in their life and in the here and now, we talk about frequency, intensity, duration. You'll never forget what happened to you. But then we would try to work concretely on what I call the C, the consequence. 2 years later, 10 years later, regardless of historically when the event happened. And are we talking about things like shame and embarrassment? Are we talking about things like anxiety and dread about that will happen again to you? Is it basically again feelings of inadequacy and worthlessness because of what happened to you? What emotions are we talking about when you talk about your trauma?
What emotions are we talking about? Like, I guess every type of emotion. So the anxiety, the fear, the the self doubt. Am I good enough? Am I not good enough? Is this person judging me, assessing me? Like I was subject to, being forced to sleep with other people in front of my ex partner, and I've only had one partner, and that's my son's dad, and every single type of violence that happened. So it was, being forced to do things I didn't want to do, getting drugged and having to do these things. And if I didn't do that, I got hurt. And then the stalking, the tracking, all of it. And it's like, is everyone doing that to me? Or, you know, is everyone going to treat me that way? Or, you know what I mean?
And I hope very much, by the way, that it was a relatively long time ago. So the kinds of things you just shared is this very recent in the last year or two, or this is again longer?
This is going for the last 10 years, but I've managed to, the last time I probably seen him was in 2023. But
2020.
but he's incarcerated, so that's yeah.
So let's do it in two different ways to see if it makes sense to you. The anxiety that I think you're speaking about, going back to your belief system, is that obviously things happen to you. And the anxiety, not the concern and being cautious about look before you leave and basically making good choices to reduce the possibility of harm against someone again violating you. But this type of anxiety is that in your belief system, which just proves you're a human being, is that since it happened once, maybe even more than once, it surely, unfortunately, could happen again. Could, doesn't mean it has to. And it be in your belief system, you tell yourself, but I must absolutely have a guarantee that it won't ever happen to me again because it was so horrible and terrible that I couldn't bear even the thought it could happen to me again. So it must not. And even at that moment, if you're safe, literally, you'll still again feel dread and anxiety because our brain cannot tell that there's been a belief in an event in the world. In this case, I call it the what if. So again, with great respect, is of course I would hope it would never happen to you again, or that you've developed skills to see what the situation is and get out again without having to go through again the violation. But there is no guarantees in life. But if in your own way, which doesn't make you crazy, makes you human, you're saying, but it was so fucking horrible and terrible, I must absolutely know that it'll never happen to me again. Well, you do know intellectually there is no guarantees. All right.
Mm.
you keep demanding one in the real world, because in the real world, they don't exist. That way of thinking, and also demanding a guarantee along with catastrophizing, will lead to what I think you are calling anxiety. So how do we work on that? Just on that one specific, is that if you were working with me in one of my groups or my client, we'd sit down and write down, not the historical, again, perpetration or activating events. We would do that also at a certain time of therapy. But I'd say, well, let's write this belief down. I cannot feel safe at all or comfortable right now without an absolute guarantee that what happened to me in the past cannot happen to me now. We actually write that down. And I think right now, even in our Zoom, is that intellectually, there are no guarantees, right? So
Mm.
now how do you convince yourself that you can live in the world now with only possibilities, again, and possibilities and no certainty of safety or that it can't happen again? Well, you start to one challenge the demand. Again, would be is that, well, it'd be great if there's an absolute guarantee that I'll be safe the rest of my life in a relationship, but it doesn't exist. Next dispute would be again is that it's a very unpleasant, painful thought to think that what happened then could happen now, but I can bear the thought. I can because you do. Okay, but you can do it without again misery, and then try to convince yourself again, which I think is the truth. I'm assuming through what you've gone through, not only have you survived literally, but you also have any type of again tools where either how you read situations or again what you could, and that'd be something else. What you could see is going on that could be a danger sign, so you remove yourself or you get yourself into a safer place. We'd have those kinds of discussions. And obviously, that'd be something you'd work on. It's not going to be a one-shot deal, but that's how you get rid of the anxiety or dramatically decrease it. But you still want to keep what's called concern and being cautious. Why wouldn't you? Again, because again, unfortunately, those things still can happen, maybe at high risk or low risk, but they surely could still happen. Okay.
Mm.
Now, the other one in our APT trap talk, we would call it an ego disturbance. And this is really what's really to me quite sad would be is that you probably did nothing wrong. You were perpetrated on. Either you trusted people that unfortunately turned out not to be trustable, or people who basically were up to no good. And regardless of the reason why, because no one knows everything at any one moment. And yet you're the one who can then say that I'm fucked up or that
Mm.
or I was stupid or how could I have been so gullible, etc., as I ought not to be. And isn't that horrible? It really proves that a label of yourself that you're either stupid or you're worthless or you're unlovable, something negative or something that again would lead to feelings of inferiority or again get worthlessness or self-condemning. I stole this from Mel Byrnes. I call it shithood. Is that
Yeah.
so you could prove again that in hindsight you maybe saw things in hindsight you didn't see then, or that you struggled basically again to take care of yourself because either you're in need of approval, you didn't have too many life experiences. So we'd figure out why you made the choices you did if you did make choices that you wish you hadn't made. But would any of that prove that you're unlovable, rotten, or worthless? And the answer is no. But again, how you could convince yourself is that again, we lay those beliefs out, we would challenge them. One of my favorite strategies, basically, if another woman had your exact life experiences and she was sitting with us and she said to you and I, well, I am a piece of shit because only an idiot would have got herself into those situations or again, stayed in those situations. So therefore I deserve nothing. No, I think you'd be the first person. If I said to you, do you agree with her? You go, absolutely not. And if I said, well, why don't you agree with her? What would you say to her?
Um. Well, that no one deserves to be, treated that way,
Right. Right. What else?
and you know, um, people have people have what's the word I'm looking for? It's your human rights to be able to feel safe. It's human rights to you know, have your own decisions, and no one should take those decisions away from a person.
But if I was a tough cookie this way, it doesn't matter if I was a man or woman. Yeah, I totally agree with you, Mel. Or how could I have been so fucking stupid not to have seen it in real time? Or how could I have been so weak to let them do this to me as I ought not to? And that makes me again rotten. Again, I think
You,
you would tell me what? You would say what to me?
you probably were aware of what was going on and knowing it's not right, but the fear that some people put into you, it's hard to get out of those decisions. Everyone tells you to leave and leave and leave, and it's the hardest thing to do is to leave, especially when, you have a child to that person or whatever. But leaving sometimes the most dangerous thing.
Yeah, it can be. It can be. Is that the way I do with my clients, by the way, would be is if you have credible evidence of fear of bodily harm, that someone could kill you or maim you, well, you might placate them until you get to a safer place to get out of there. Another one is that if you're financially dependent, not emotionally, financially dependent, and you have children, you often will stay because of the sake of your children, because that perpetrator, even if they're not hurting the children physically, will do anything to make you miserable. And those are what I call legitimate reasons why you would choose to stay, not because, again, you're weak, but because you're making an intelligent choice and then plot and scheme about how to get out of there as soon as you can. But
Mm,
my explanation would be, again, is if not a weak person, but if a person is struggling emotionally, can't
mm,
bear the thought of being alone, or they basically unfortunately bought into a guilt premise, would be somehow you're a rotten person if you leave, or again would be is that look what I've done for you, so how can you leave me? We'd figure it out. It's not an excuse or an alibi, it's an explanation. And I would still say that even if the person they wish they had done something different, would that make them a rotten person that have to condemn themselves? And the answer is no. It just proves you're a human being who may either have enough emotional strength at that moment or the courage at that moment to basically again take the risk to leave. Nothing more, nothing less. So we'd work on getting to unconditionally accept you and still maybe say again in certain ways, well, I still regret I didn't have enough strength at that moment. Or I really
mm.
wish basically I knew what I know now because I would have done things differently then. Probably we don't know for sure because we never know sure exactly what we're going to do in certain situations. But we work at again getting rid of the self-condemning over it. And as I
Yeah,
said,
well,
you go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, it was like one of those things. My child got removed from me by the department on multiple occasions because of not being able to protect him. And, every time I got to the point I was leaving, he would get incarcerated. And then it was like, get a white picket fence manipulation story. I'm sorry, rah, 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 things will change. Then comes out. And then it's like being put so far down into a deep hole, set on fire, add more fuel to it. And then you're living in this nightmare again. And then you packed your stuff, you're gone, and then the incarceration happens again, and it's the white picket fence story. So it's like that was that pattern of behaviour for so long, and he would come out, my child would be removed, I would get all this stuff happen to me, and then I've moved to my own place, and then it's finding where I am, stalking me, harassing me, all that type of stuff, and it was just
And
that.
when he harassed you and stalked you, did the authorities intervene and basically put him back in jail or not?
Yes, on some occasions, yes. I mean, there's an active intervention or whatever, but people don't abide to them,
And and the child that I know, and the child that we're talking about, this is a boy or girl.
as a boy.
And how old is he now?
He's 10.
And he's with you or he's not with you?
He's with me now. Yep.
Okay. And things are safe and okay now?
Mm, yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So when we originally started our discussion, it was again, and I'm really glad to hear that you're safe and with your son. Good. Is that so? It would be the historical part, what people call post-traumatic stress disorder or trauma, because even
Mm,
if you're in the here and now, okay, you still can have emotional problems or misery, and again, difficulties. Again, what happened in the past. So
yeah. It's like anxiety of the future,
that's
like
right.
what's going to happen.
Right.
Mm,
And so basically, I'll just fit it in is that I think again, if you have not read a book, Albert Ellis, the founder of REBT, wrote many self-help books, and he wrote a really good one called again, How to Control Your Anxiety Before It Controls You.
mhm,
As I explained to people, and I won't speed up, but if I do it this way, there's three kinds of anxieties that we look for in REBT. If it's not, let's say, brain-based, where you have to be medicated. One is general anxiety, which is really catastrophizing about the future and demanding absolute guarantees of safety and security when they don't exist, because your belief is that, well, what if that would take place? That would be awful and horrible to the point I can't bear the thought of it happening. And that way of thinking will lead to anxiety, right? Another type of anxiety is ego-based anxiety, things like social anxiety, public speaking anxiety, test taking anxiety. And this is based on a belief that if one does not succeed and or win people's approval, the need, not the preference, but that I must and I need people's approval by winning them over, that would be unbearable and prove you're inadequate, worthless, and no good. So what most psychologists call high or low self-esteem, we don't use that terminology in RET. We call it again self-condemning in a global way, where you could prove that you fail at something. We all do, but then to say, therefore, I'm a total fucking failure and I always will be in the future, can either lead to anxiety or depression. And the third type of anxiety is normally what's called panic, where you can make yourself anxious about feeling anxious. So it's so horrible and terrible to feel anxious and threatened that I can't bear those emotions. They're awful. So now you make yourself anxious about being anxious. And you could have more than you could have all three at one time. But most people basically are struggling more with one or the other. And when
mhm.
people have gone through vile, again, um, violations, okay, or what normally is called traumatic events, One can be the shame and embarrassment that we talked about, that somehow you're rotten and no good because of what happened to you. And or that I worked with a woman who basically said, he said, I was old enough to go to the authorities when I was 14, 15 years old. I did not, because he said he would hurt me. You know how they work, and basically perpetrators. And 20 years later, she was still hating herself for not having the courage to do it. So that would be classical ego, anxiety, self-condemning. And the one we started again with our conversation would be is anxiety about the future, where if you get into your belief system, it won't be the thoughtful thinking about, oh shit, I never want to go through that again. And I hope it's over for the rest of my life and my son's life. However, because you're human, you can always say, well, there is no guarantees. What if it did happen? Either, I don't know if that could ever happen with him again or someone in the future. And then in your own way, because you're human, nothing more, nothing less. I always say is that way, not crazy, is that then you say to yourself, but I can't bear the thought it could ever happen again. I must have a guarantee. I must know absolutely what will happen to me, because without that guarantee, I can't enjoy the moment. Well, that's basically what we call general anxiety. And again, we work on all of them that way. So can you change your past history? No, but can you change how you emotionally respond to not only the past, but to possible future events with, again, much more healthy emotions like concern and being cautious versus anxiety or dread or, again, depression? The answer is absolutely, if you work on your belief system.
Right. And I wanted to jump in real quick, just to make sure this is making sense to you, Mel, because REBT is one of the or the only form of therapy that differentiates between unhealthy negative emotions and healthy negative emotions. So, in this case, we would never want you to not have a healthy concern about, looking out to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But things like anxiety are labeled as like unhealthy because they freeze us, they help, make us kind of inactive, or they don't help us make healthier decisions, in the long run. So we'd want you to keep that concern, but we'd want to vanquish that anxiety completely, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Another one, Mel, we haven't touched on, basically, because I'll check in with you about this one. A lot of people who come from, again, a background like yours could have unbelievable rage and anger, not only at the perpetrator, but at the system for not working the way it's supposed to work, or treating them unfairly. And you didn't mention that, but I wouldn't be surprised is that you could struggle with that without saying because you could, that you got to. Okay. There is a got to, people deal with things differently. But then they class, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you. It was one of those things, I got myself to a safe home and all that with my son, and then the Department of Child Protection released my address in court binding documents to the perpetrator, and then, threatened to take my son if I didn't go into crisis accommodation the other side of town when I was working and my son was attending school. And it's like, you've just made me move like over 10 times in 1 year because of your mistake. And
Right.
you then removed my son as well, because I had a lapse, and then that lapse was only a day, and then you remove him, and it's like, you wonder why, that happened. And, there was just that, oh, we're sorry, it was a mistake. And it's like, okay, well, I'm sorry, I can't protect my son due to someone perpetrating violence on me. Like,
Right. Right. And again, a lot of people would say, if they didn't know about REBT, is that would anyone, including you, have a right to be angry? And the response that I would give is that you could choose to make yourself angry and enraged. And then the question I would ask, does the anger and rage change their fuck up? The answer is no. Does it make it easier or harder to deal with? Probably harder, because it's hard enough the way it is. And then create physical stress and anger, which just proves we're human beings. And I don't know how much you knew about REBT before we started talking today, but the but again would be is that the theory, which is really a fact, we call it the theory of musculatory thinking, which simply means if you take any healthy desire or preference, any, and they're all healthy and good, but in our thinking, you change it to a fanatic, dogmatic demand or a command or a must or necessity, you'll physically stress yourself and create what we call unhealthy emotions. So think it through. If you said, it's hard for me to believe how fucking stupid and incompetent they were, even though they said they were sorry, because look at the hardship they created, and I wish it wasn't so. Well, you still would be quite mistrustful of the system or frustrated, displeased that they didn't do what they could have done competently. But as soon as you would say, how fucking dare they be so stupid? How dare they? Those bastards, they can't be that stupid. And the answer is, oh, yes, they can't, unfortunately, even if it's rotten and wrong. So we go after the demand to get you back to being frustrated, displeased, and trustful of something that basically, again, got in the way of what you had created at that point, a safe place for you and your son, but get rid of the anger.
Mm.
Okay.
I don't really get angry. Like, I don't really feel that emotion anymore. of anger. I feel disappointment. I feel sad.
Yeah.
You know, I just feel a bit empty
Yeah.
all the time. You know, sometimes I can be quite happy, but it's a glimpse of it, and then it's just back to nothing.
Well, and as Jack pointed out to you, because again, you're receiving a lot of, I try to understand new information, is that yes, we're one of the few forms of therapy that talk about healthy versus unhealthy negative emotions. So to be sad is not to depress oneself. To be frustrated, irritated, displeased is different than, again, anger, hostility, rage. To basically have disappointment, regret over what one has done or not done is not the same thing as self-hatred or feels inadequacy. So in our MBT, we don't try to get people to give up their emotions, but moment by moment, much more skillfully control their emotions in a healthy way. Okay, not perfectly. We don't do anything perfectly. And I use the phrase frequency, intensity, and duration. So if we were continuously working together, I say, well, every couple of weeks, how you doing? If you go, well, again, I still struggle over X, Y, or Z, we still would look at that. But then hopefully, again, over time, you would go for longer periods of time, again, enjoying the moment, or basically, again, doing what you want to do in your life. And if you then, unfortunately, were experiencing, again, things like depression or anger or feelings of inadequacy or shame or anxiety, we'd work on that. So hopefully, again, the intensity will go down. You again would go for a longer period of time without experiencing it at all. If you do, you know what to do about it because you're learning the process of figuring it out, identifying, catching those thoughts when they pop up, and knowing what to do about them so that you'll more quickly get rid of, again, that way of thinking that leads to those kinds of emotions. All right. So, do you have any questions at this point about how you kind of could apply this to what you still work at certain times?
Yeah, how's the starting process of navigating that tune in your head, you know, back to a different frequency, you know, because I'm on some sort of one frequency. How do I tune myself to another one to sort of, you know, start the process of, I guess, the emotional regulation of, I don't know, I guess acceptance of.
Well, you said that's what it really is. The different psychologists, I use the word again, emotional control management versus self-regulation. It's really the same thing. Again, would be is it how do you control? You can't control it pops into your belief system. Okay, I call it, your brain burps, it pops again, you have a belief. But if you act on it or not act on it, it's a choice. And also you can change it into a dialogue where you don't challenge it. You have the belief or the memory, but how you challenge, again, how you're thinking about it, which changes, again, your interpretation so that before you can have much more resiliency or a lot more healthy emotions more consistently, or get rid of emotions that are very painful and, again, are unhealthy. And you keep working on it that way. Now, other things that, well, I just want to point out, there's other forms of psychotherapy that spend years with you, years, just dialoguing the shit that happened in the past. And certain clients basically feel better when they go through that because they feel safe sharing it with someone, which is maybe they never shared with anybody, but they kind of get trapped because, again, the more you only think about the past, then you focus again on the past and not the here and now and the future. And we go over activated events. That's what we would call what happened in your life. But we can't change what happened in your life, but we can change, again, how you think about those events so you don't make yourself anxious about the future or, again, hurt yourself emotionally again now over what happened then. And I've worked with hundreds of people doing that, again, using our ABT.
Yeah, and it really, comes down to what we've been doing here is kind of disputing those irrational beliefs. So, like when you feel that anxiety about the future, what would you say is the thought that's popping into your head most when you're feeling that, the belief that kind of seems to be creating that anxiety the most?
I don't know. I sort of seem to get just anxious and have to go. And like if I'm, you know, around people for too long or whatever, I sort of get anxiety, an overwhelming feeling that I need to bail and just go and be by myself.
Okay, so that when you start to feel the discomfort, you basically make a good choice if you can, and obviously you can, is that you disengage and go calm yourself down, or you basically, again, start to basically get yourself in a place where you can feel more comfortable. What we would do basically is that, Jack, if she says, I don't really know, the homework assignment would be is that, well, you're going to keep not a journal, but basically a little log so that when you start to, again, experience certain kinds, when you know that you're feeling anxious, you could do the best you can to externalize and write down what you're thinking. And some clients will say, I'm not really sure what I'm thinking when I feel that anxiety or that depression or that anger. And I'll go, okay, well, we have a speculation that it might not be exactly the way you're thinking about it, but probably pretty close. but let's again collect some information. And so therefore don't go out and purposely make yourself anxious or depressed or angry. But when you do, when you start experiencing it with me, is externalize it on a piece of paper and write down what you're thinking when you're experiencing anxiety. And you figure it out pretty quick that way.
Right.
No, but based on this conversation, without jumping to conclusions, is that I think Mel mainly is doing what I call public speech, is the what if thinking. If it happened before, not only do I hope and pray that it doesn't happen in the future, but it could, and therefore that would be awful and horrible. Therefore, I must have the guarantee that awful, horrible thing can't happen to me or my child ever again in the future in order to feel safe now. My hunch, Mel, is something like that. You might not think exactly, but something like that, and we'll figure out what your version of that is.
Yeah, it is a bit like that. Yeah, like, is that person going to do the same thing to me?
Right.
You know,
That's your version. Yeah. So you got a new relationship, and again, I'm assuming, I hope you guys have the courage, is to remember that that man does represent all of mankind. Okay, even though other men can act that way, but the idea would begin is that you take the risk and have the courage to get engaged in relationships. Is that basically it would be, and then you start to feel the anxiety. Of course, if I was working with you, anyone was working with you, but you're working with yourself, are there any signs? Okay, but here we go. But someone could say to me, no, he's good as gold, but that doesn't fucking prove that he can't turn out to be like the others were, because there is no absolute guarantees. But if you say, I can't bear the thought of going through it again, I can't bear the thought I'd be stupid enough to get myself in that situation, that belief will lead to anxiety, either ego-based, you're fooled to even try, because if it doesn't work out right, again, it validates that you're an idiot, and or I just couldn't bear going through it again. And a lot of people give up on relationships then, because that's the way of feeling safe. They just disengage. But then unfortunately, the disadvantage would be is that your opportunity for true intimacy, love, and friendship in a wonderful relationship is null and void, because if you don't take the risk, you'll never find out.
Yeah.
Easy for me to say because I didn't go through what you went through, but that's what courage said. You try to muster up your courage and decrease your anxiety so that you can take the risk with your eyes open. And I would assume, until proven otherwise, is that you have enough life experiences and you're smart enough that you could see, you and I would have that discussion, is that as soon as you saw certain things, you leave. When I say leave, you don't pursue the relationship. All right. So,
and to kind of answer a little bit more of your question of like what the process is of kind of overcoming that, Terry already started with it, with like keeping a log of your thoughts, like trying to find that exact belief that you can then dispute, because once you find out which belief it is that is kind of leading to the anxiety or causing the anxiety, that's where you start the disputation process. And so is there really any evidence that I can't bear the thought of this, does this actually say something about me? Asking yourself those questions, and then through that process you establish a new belief, a new effective belief to kind of replace that old one, something empowering that kind of like, that still doesn't like make light of what you went through, and still gives you that concern to watch out for the future, but also allows you to have the courage to go meet new people or stay in social situations or whatever whatever the anxiety is preventing you from
It's also like the way I am and all that then projects onto making people or males or whatever feel inadequate. Is it them? And then they have that me, how I am or react in situations because I get in my own head, and then it's my trauma and what I've been through ends up making someone else feel a bit insecure about themselves, and I don't like that that I can make someone feel like that just because of
that'd be another discussion of basically, it would be obviously how you interact with people is an influence on them. What I would try to educate you is that you're not that powerful. In other words, unless you physically harm someone, basically is that you can basically treat people in a way that they can disturb themselves over, but that's not the same thing as that you can directly hurt someone's feeling or make them feel insecure. So I work with women who say to me, well, the way I come across, I make men feel insecure. I go, no, they make themselves feel insecure because they don't know how to deal with, let's say, a female who stands up for herself, is opinionated, is not needy or dependent on them, and they either don't like it or they make themselves feel insecure. Well, you want to weed those people out, because would you want a man who would make himself feel threatened because you speak your mind? I hope not. That you would want to be. Would you want to be in a relation? No. So it's a weeding out process, because again, is that not because they're weak or bad, But if they can't handle a woman who stands up for herself in a strong, determined, assertive fashion, then you're not compatible with them anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, all
Well,
right.
that makes sense.
All right. Okay. All right. So, do you think this has been helpful to you at all?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. And by the way, I just, what I'd say curious would be, have you historically now been in therapy?
Yes, I have been in. Yeah, I've done about
And
30 odd different courses of, women's behavior change and anger management and trauma therapy and family violence therapy and
right.
all these different ones. And I mean, I've got a different answer and stuff from each different person. So, it gives me different ways of thinking and approaching things. And, I feel like I am recovering and I am growing as a person and being more aware of, I do overanalyze and then I overanalyze that and again, and I
That's great.
am a
Right.
bit more weary in life now, and more cautious of knowing what red flags are and all that type of stuff.
Well, I would hope, and this again is just a brief introduction again. It's been a pleasure meeting you again in the Zoom, a little chit chat, is that I think REBT could be another great tool for you. Not that you haven't learned from, again, the other forms of psychotherapy, but a very essential life skill is emotion control management, what you call self-regulated. A lot of forms of therapy talk about it, but they don't give you a process of how to really become proficient at it. Everyone says, oh yeah, you got to learn how to control your stress levels. And you got to, decrease your anger. And everyone goes, oh yeah, that's a great idea. But how do you do that? Well, REBT is a cognitive approach because what we normally call our emotions about anything that happened or is happening now in the future, the activating event, the situation contributes, but mainly again is your core philosophy, the way you think about it. So we uncover again the person's irrational way or again unrealistic way of thinking, and then help them educate again. Really, it's educating your brain to think differently, so you respond very differently, physically and emotionally, to events that you might have disturbed yourself over in an unhealthy way, but not anymore, or very, very infrequently, not again as intensely, not as long. So it could be another tool for you.
Yeah, and if you need any, if you're looking for any resources, I can give you Terry's email, and I can, I have plenty of resources in terms of REBT, in terms of reading materials and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
then
that would be good.
I'll also
Just
send
email
you.
me through some.
Yeah, definitely. I will definitely throw that your way. And I'll also send you this recording as well. So before I even, before it's uploaded, I'll send it right over to you, and you can pick out little things that you heard through this session that might be helpful. And yeah, and then I'll give you Terry's email as well if there's any questions, you want to have any correspondence with him or me, either way. Just yeah, any resources you need, we're here for it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, well,
thank you.
Is it 1:00 in the afternoon on Sunday already by you? Are you a day ahead of us?
Yeah, I'm in the future.
Gotcha. So,
Crazy.
Yeah.
well, real
Yes.
pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for your help.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And like I said, it makes a huge difference because, regardless of, first and foremost, we want to make sure it's something that you find helpful. After that, you're still helping more and more people. Once this is published, there's people out there who will realize that, hey, they're not the only people who went through, shit like that. And to see the bravery that you came on here and talked about it, talking to two people you've never met before, I really give you kudos. I really commend you. So thank you again. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good day, Mel.
All right.
You have a good night. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been an episode of the Rational Harm Reduction podcast. If you're interested in volunteering to participate and come on as a guest to talk about any mental health issues that you're currently struggling with or would like some feedback or guidance on, you can find us on Facebook at Rational Harm Reduction, or you can email us at rationalharmreduction@gmail.com. Thank you all for listening, and stay safe out there.